Hi there. So I left off the previous episode saying I feel strangely compelled because I have received what is to me a sign. Since it is Halloween, and because of the scary nature of the world as of late, I thought I would do something a little seasonal. Since writing and producing the last episode, and actually during the production of it, a bunch of world events have been happening. If we didn't feel anxious before, we surely must now. No cocoon or wall that we might like to build could keep out all that is happening. If ever I needed a push to be compelled to say my piece with regards to humanity dealing with massive change, then surely the summer and early fall of 2017 has provided that push. While it can all be quite overwhelming, I would like to offer perspective that can allow us to see all that is happening within the confines of a simplified context. To be overwhelmed is analogous to feeling a bad headache coming on, a very undesirable experience. To deliver this simple perspective, I'll first need to go out on a limb. First, we'd climb a tree, and maybe then we'd talk. Here I am, out on a limb. As a little bit of an aside, I wrote the script for this episode on the 18th of October. The passing of Gord Downie, the frontman of Tragically Hip, was on my mind for much of the day. I am just the right age to have been a Tragically Hip fan since near their very beginnings. I attended one of the shows last year on the final tour after it was announced that Gord had an inoperable tumor. So Gord's passing is in the emotional background of much of what I've written for this episode. There is a reason I went out on a limb. Sometimes you need to in order to demonstrate something. Behold, as the pendulum swings. The idea of the swing of the pendulum is one that has often been referenced in periods of change in Western civilization. For a time, it may swing into the darkness when old ideas no longer seem to work and anxiety runs high. And with that, we sometimes see rash or even monstrous behavior with lethal consequences. Too much of this for too long sees a breakdown of social order until a point where the leaders are forced to take a hard look at things and begin to entertain new ideas, eventually reworking the various social contracts. Then things begin to improve as the pendulum swings back the other way. The trouble with the way this works is we don't exactly know the time scale of the pendulum swing. Is it simply a matter of a few years? Or will the swing into darkness be many years? It is hard to tell when the various leaders might be starting to reach a consensus, thus causing the thing to swing back into the light. I suspect this thing is swinging a long way into the darkness, because there is a certain amount of frightening momentum this time around. But it is always difficult to know for certain how far the pendulum will swing because we tend to base our assessment upon a set number of things. When we are inherently bent towards seeing the positive, our assessment can be skewed. For example, we might look at recent declarations of many governments requiring that all new vehicles be electric by a certain date in the near future, and the attendant announcement by many car companies to meet that challenge. Or we could cite the fact that green energy is becoming ever more competitive, such that it will likely be an ever greater proportion of electricity generation. If you look at both of those kinds of things alone, you would be making an argument for the positive. The glass is half full, and the pendulum is swinging back in spite of some recent dark happenings. But what if these dark happenings are closer to the new normal? I can make you scared, if you want me to. Consider extreme weather. What if this hurricane season is not so much an anomaly, but something like a new normal? And what about deadly raging fires that seem to be beyond our ability to control? From a mere economic calculus cost alone, the price of rebuilding is astronomical. Insurance companies are having to charge enormous premiums to avoid bankruptcy. Some places that are too vulnerable may have to be abandoned. We might start to see environmental refugees in developed countries too, and not just from places like Northern Africa and the Middle East. The other thing that can mean the pendulum has not swung all the way to the dark side yet concerns the question of whether things will start to settle down, and we can start to build our lives around this new normal. What if, for instance, things worsen further? What if normal turns out to be a moving target? Many arguments are being made that suggest we have not faced anything like this in all of modern history. We might have to go back to the Dark Ages with the plagues and witch hunt scapegoating to find anything like this potential future we face. This is the negative, glass half empty, everything is bleak view. Is it somewhere in the middle? Will things more or less start to stabilize now that we've had this wake-up call that kicks us out of our complacency? Hard to say with the political situation in certain countries and nuclear saber-rattling going on. It is like a trade of competing existential crises. Which way do we want to go down? Will we live to survive our paradoxes? So much depends on the sum total of human engagement, and the outcome is highly skewed to the decisions of relatively wealthy people. People like us, that have an internet connection and a device to connect to it with. Can enough of us get behind the idea that can lead to a brighter future? That can see the pendulum swing back the other way? It is not yet clear, because it's not clear if we are willing to take a critical and hard look at our old ideas that may be failing us. I tread into dangerous territory here. Me debunk an American myth, and take my life in my hands. For we have to ask, with angry populism resurgent on both the right and the left of the political spectrum, and this is significantly due to emergent inequality, are we willing to question whether capitalism is even working? Because if trends continue, there is a risk of insurrection. Add this to the mix, and we may quickly find ourselves living in a world of permanent emergency, where we will be living with the consequences, because courage didn't come in time. Maybe there is a hope for courage yet in the face of something that looks like the end of days, even to those who do not subscribe to such a religious view. Certainly I can cite an example of courage for you by way of another aside. It is unfortunate that so many people are snatched away from us while they are still young, or relatively so within middle age. We expect that on average, most of those we care about and are connected to will live into their 80s perhaps, and if they do so and then go, it is less of a shock. But the reality is we lose people throughout life, and sometimes we know in advance that we will be losing them. But that doesn't make it easier necessarily. There is a unique thing about knowing your days are very much numbered though. How will you live your life knowing you have only a little bit of time? This happens quite a lot, and often people with terminal illnesses will drop off the radar. Their world shrinks, and for the most part, only the closest of family and friends are there to the end. Most people go quietly. There are some, though, that buck that trend, and Gord Downie was something of an extreme case in this. He always lived life large during his adult life. He was the front and center of Canada's rock band, But that doesn't mean that all rock stars go out the way he did, though. More often than not, they go out quietly like the rest of us do. But Gord Downie did not shrink his world. No, he greatly expanded it. He, with his band members in Tragically Hip, blew the rooftops off the biggest concert venues in Canada in a concert series like we've never seen before, nor likely we'll ever see again. But he wasn't done yet. With the tour wrapped up on August 20th of 2016, Gord turned his attention to completing The Secret Path. This was a solo album project accompanied with a graphic novel telling of the tragic life of Anishinaabe boy Chani Wedjek and his escape from residential school and his succumbing to the elements as he tried to walk home back in 1966. Gord was able to bring attention to this project in such a huge way as it followed right on the heels of the farewell tour. In a big way, Gord Downie single-handedly brought vastly greater attention to Canada's reconciliation process. We might have easily become complacent in this country, much to our shame, had it not been for Gord's efforts to raise our consciousness. The ripples of his efforts will extend into our future, as the Secret Path graphic novel was also adapted into an animated film, and these are both being used as teaching tools in many classrooms across the country. I could go on and on. The point is just how remarkable a thing it was, and will continue to be, that a guy who knew he was dying did all of this. The landscape of Canadians' minds has been altered, and this for the second time for anyone old enough to remember Terry Fox. How extraordinary to witness this, to be impacted by this. In a way, you altered our universe in this country, Gord Downie, a thing maybe only a poet that lives their art could do. But maybe, just maybe, we should all be inspired and compelled to do even a little bit of the same ourselves. Then we'd know for certain which way that pendulum would swing.